Now we'll move on to the most awaited panel discussion. Marking the significance of today's date, this panel discussion will be containing all ladies panelists. We now move where we explore the societal challenges posed by climate change and how we can address them. This panel brings together some incredible women leaders who have been at the forefront of sustainability, urban planning, and climate justice. The panel discussions titled Societal Challenges in a Climate Challenged World, moderated by our very own Professor Amitav Malik. Our distinguished panelists for this panel are Dr. Girija Godbole, a leading expert and Godwater Fund lead in water security and rural development, working to build a climate resilient communities in Maharashtra, who has 20 plus years of experience in environment and development. Our next panelist is Ms. Aditi Kale, a climate resilience specialist advocating for behavioral changes and reducing consumerism to ensure lasting sustainability. We also have with us urban sustainability expert specializing in infrastructure planning for rapid decarbonization and building climate resilient smart cities, Dr. Anagha Paranspe. The CEO of Clean Energy Access Network, a pioneering innovator in biomass energy and sustainable development, leading initiatives to bridge clean energy access for universe undeserved communities. We also have Dr. Priyadarshini Karve ma'am with us. I kindly request the esteemed panelists and our convener, Professor Amitav Malik, to kindly be on stage for the panel discussion. Also, due to the time constraints, the time for panel discussion has been reduced to 30 minutes. So I would request the panelists to please stick to the time. Thank you.
Namaskar, everybody. Not a loud kasai. It's not loud enough. Anybody can hear? Okay. So this was a panel discussion on how society should react to, or how should society navigate through what is called a climate challenged world. We have heard many times this topic being mentioned in the morning session in some way or other, where the buck stops with the individual. It's called a global problem, a global issue, and yet all the solutions start with local solutions or local actions. So that local action again will be initiated by what the society thinks about how to deal with the changes that are now looking inevitable. So for that purpose, we have an eminent panel, which Nidhi has already talked about. We unfortunately had to curtail the time because we were running late, and we don't want to go beyond 5 o'clock. After this, there is one more panel discussion on sustainable development, which Dr. Gurudas will moderate. And I'm requesting Gurudas to also speak about it a little bit before that. So, since the topic is societal response or societal reaction to climate challenge world, we are of course assuming that the future will be a climate challenged world. How? What we take for granted for today, that the rainy season will come at such a time, winter will come at such a time. In Pune, rainfall will be such quantity. In Calcutta, it will be some other quantity. In other words, we have got used to a predictable pattern of climatic behavior, temperature behavior, precipitation behavior, which has been part of our life for more than 1,000 years. Now, for the first time, because of what we have created, the anomaly of excessive CO2 in atmosphere, many things are changing. IPCC has predicted what all can change, and yet IPCC also attaches percentage possibility, probability to all that they say. So, which means what will happen in a couple of years? Yes, I do mean couple of years, because by 2030 things will not be the same as today. What parameter will change? Not really definable, because all parameters are interrelated. And yet, the humankind will have to negotiate successfully in such a way that without causing a further penalty to the environment, we are able to conduct our life as smoothly, as happily, as successfully as possible. Not an easy task. And therefore, I thought on an International Day of Women, we will invite 4 women thinkers in different areas and different ways of looking at it, and take that forward with their thought process. So may I to begin with ask Girija to take the cue.
Thank you, Professor Malik and Dr. Nulkar, for giving me this opportunity. And I also must thank you for including this dimension, the social dimensions of climate change, in this panel, because we don't often hear about this in conferences, workshops on climate change. Uh, so I have a PPT, but I think I will not show it because in the interest of time. And also I'm going to speak very briefly. I'll just raise a few points and maybe later we can kind of. Yeah. Maybe not even that. Just maybe 5 minutes. I'll donate my time to my other panelists. Okay. So when we think of climate change, we often look at it as environmental crisis. But I think climate change is more than that. It's really a social crisis because there are so many inequalities that are associated with climate change, and they are at various levels. It could be like rich countries, poor countries. It could be rich and poor within the same country. It could be men and women and other genders, or it could be the generation-wise inequality as well. So we must remember that it's much more than the environmental crisis. It's a social crisis. And also we know that everyone is not affected by climate change the same way. The poor and the vulnerable people are affected by climate change much more and in many ways. And this we tend to forget sometimes. We know that even within these groups, say for example, groups like women-headed households or people from certain castes, religions, it could be sexual minorities, they are affected very differently by climate change. And we need to remember that all the time. I'm glad that Professor Ranade mentioned about justice, and I think Priyadarshini is going to speak more about that. And this root causes of their vulnerability, as we know, is a combination of factors. It could be their social location, their financial, their socioeconomic, cultural, and gender status. It could be their access to resources, services, and decision-making powers, and justice. So it's a combination of all of this. And as I said, they are disproportionately affected. Even the measures that are taken to combat climate change, they also affect these people differently. So for example, if there is any expansion, for example, in public transport system or something, and if there is increase in cost because of this, then the poor families are affected much more than others. I work in rural development more and environment also. We often see that in villages, when we undertake measures like, say, Charai Bandi, non-grazing, like ban on grazing, we often don't consider its impact on people who depend on grazing for their livelihood. So, or for example, the usual one is solar panels on waste land, quote unquote. The communities, the landless people who depend on these kind of lands, they are severely affected by such measures. So we need to be mindful of of these measures when we design those. Uh, so, what can be done? I mean, the topic given, I think, societal reforms is quite a ambitious kind of a goal, but we need to be ambitious, I suppose. And for this to bring in reforms, I think we need to change our attitudes, our norms, our practices, which is not an easy thing at all, as we all know. And to bring in these large scale changes, there could be some factors which are endogenous and some kind of factors which may be from outside. So the factors which are within could be the environmental organizations, for example, who can bring in change. In Pune, we have the example of Pune River Revival, Jivit Nadi, Parisar, those kind of groups who have been doing excellent work for last many years. Outfits like that could be a catalyst to bring in these changes. And civil societies, as we all know, play an important role because they can also promote collaboration between the private sector, the government, and the other sectors of the society. So their role is very important. They can also encourage communities to take ownership of climate action through education. It could be capacity building, it could be resource allocation, and they can also support the sustainable practices at the grassroots level. One of the other things I think we should be also doing is bringing in the traditional knowledge when we design the measures and other activities. Professor Gadgil was here in the morning and he's done pioneering work with his team members in bringing in the traditional knowledge through one of the ways I think they did was People's Biodiversity Register. As we know, indigenous peoples have been living with nature for thousands of years. And when we are talking about circular economy in the context of climate change, we can learn a lot from them. So we should be making a conscious effort to bring in their knowledge. And even within the traditional, I mean, the indigenous community, focusing on women's knowledge, because we often see that in villages, you have women who are not formally educated, but who have so much of knowledge about environment and other things. And we in the sense, the scientific community usually tends to overlook this knowledge. I think we need to bring that in. And I think one of the most contentious, trickiest part, the bailing the cat, is changing our values. I mean, today is Women's Day, and patriarchal values we see everywhere. And how to change that? Are we even willing to accept that we have certain values which are not right, if I may call that? So how can we do that? How can we bring in women and other marginalized communities in the decision making, in planning, in implementation? So we need to think more about that. We need to adopt more gender responsive strategies when we talk about climate change. The gender action plan, the climate change gender action plan, they should be designed. And I think overall we need to encourage open dialogue across the various sections of society, various strata of society, and talk more about the injustice, more about inclusion, the causes of inequality. And we don't really do that, in my view. I mean, we tend to be more politically correct, and some of the issues or the contentious topics we tend to avoid. But I think we should also find platforms how we can have this open dialogue, and hopefully eventually will change. I'm a diehard optimist, so I think we will change if we keep talking and having open dialogue. Thank you.
Can I ask one question? I have a question. Can this happen of its own by the society without creating incentives? And if so, what kind of incentives we can provide, and who is that we? Not the government. I'm not talking about the government. So can the non-government agencies, think tanks, whatever you want to call it, can we pull in resources for societal reforms towards climate change? Something totally out of the box. Somebody will call me crazy, but I think it is time to be crazy.
Right. And I think that's where organizations like PIC can really play a crucial role, because because I think you have people who have worked in the government sector, who are in the corporate sector, and who have a lot of ideas.
So my earlier part of my question, how to create incentive?
Yeah, so how to create, again, I think the dialogue and the exchange of ideas is the way to go. I mean, because I think what we should not do is just impose our ideas. So the ideas should come from people. So that's why I'm saying to have that dialogue and have the dialogue with people who are really affected by climate change severely. So bring in their ideas, their views, and then based on that, we can design incentives as yours.
For instance, housewives, ladies can play a huge role in reducing the expenditure of the house, reducing consumerism. How can we incentivize a family, urban family, to bring down its disposable, not disposable, discretionary spending? Something like that. I want some input so that we can put it in our report.
So I think one thing I would urge to remember is when we talk about things like this, we should also keep in mind the power balance. I mean, when we talk about, for example, housewives or children, and how, so do they really have the power? I mean, that also we need to consider. I mean, of course, there are ways how to do it. I mean, right now, I can't really think of any concrete ways to suggest, but yeah, and definitely the homemakers, the housewives, whatever you call them, they have lot of
Can make a
like
huge difference.
yeah, definitely. I mean, they play such an important role.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah. Any other suggestion on this particular topic? Anybody? Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody can give. Yeah, somebody is getting a microphone.
Hi, my name is Sucheta Dhere. I'm a digital transformation consultant. So I am thinking of this idea of creating some incentive like civilized citizen credits. It's not only about sustainability; it's about everything. I pay all my bills on time. I don't break traffic rules. I don't uh, do anything. Similarly, if there are n number of things in the house where I reuse, whether it is dry weight, wastage, paper, milk papers, electronic waste, all the kind of envelopes I receive, I reuse and recycle 2-3 times.
What is your motivation?
Sir, I believe in sustainability. So if we, give credits, if I do something good, I get credit, whether it in office, whether it is in house, or whether it is in society. And I gain credit points, some kind of system like loyalty points, which can then be further in. First, I suppose I say I cycled for 50 kilometers in a month, so I get 5 credits. In a year, I get 15. So,
What credit? Carbon credit?
yeah, everything. So we can identify like n number of such things which
Yeah.
you do. You are protecting, you're contributing to the environment. And then, you further incentivize, reward people for doing this.
Good.
Something
Thank
like
you.
this.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Shall we move to the next panelist?
Hello. So first, I would like to clarify. I am not a consumerism expert. I am a consumer, and I am aware about human resilience. But I am an ecology and climate researcher. The idea behind this point was I am covering a role of human resilience and reducing consumerism. So the idea was that when we talk about the scientific aspects and political aspects, one thing that gets ignored many times is how do you react to it as an individual, as a household, as a community. And then we have our internal discussions on that, because even we are living in a society where we need to interact or convince people around us to actually integrate climate change or climate thinking in their own lives. So I think what I'm going to talk is a synthesis of my discussions, especially with Professor Malik, and luckily with the Climate Collective Pune members, some of whom are here. Basically, apart from understanding the climate emergency, we have to also understand that we are living in the midst of it and we'll need to adapt to the new normal. And the first thing we need to assimilate is that it is not something which is happening outside or somewhere else. It is something which we are going through. And then, if you are going through a new challenge, how do you face it? So, the human resilience aspect becomes very important, because one thing which the climate emergency is going to increase is the number of uncertainties in your life. And like any other uncertainties which you face in your work or going through your social interactions, they themselves are going to get complicated. And to top it up, you are going to face environmental emergencies and environmental stresses, which are going to add to your burden in when you go through your life. So basically, human resilience in itself is defined as first is how you can adapt to changing situations. Second is whether you can bounce back after the challenges you face. And third is trying to maintain your psychological well being in all this. So, all these three parameters are going to apply when we actually go through the climate crisis and the environmental crisis. And hence, the three solutions which we often discuss are basically boiled down to how we change our behavior, our thinking, and how we act on it. So, basically, if we look at the behavior aspect, first thing, like I said, we need to be prepared for uncertainties and we need to adapt to the new normal. We have to accept that we are living in a climate challenge world. This, especially in the younger generations, we often see eco anxiety to some extent. Up till now, it has not been flagged exactly as a mental disorder, but it is considered more in a positive way or a rational feeling based on your knowledge of the outside world. But eventually, it may go to that level, and climate extreme events itself have their psychological consequences, which can be right from facing death of loved ones to smaller things like environmental stress due to heat waves or loss of productivity or things like that, or not getting right sort of labor and things. So, first and foremost, we will have to create systems or encourage systems which help us to understand and address the mental and physical health impacts of climate change. And sometimes it feels unnecessary or a burden, but in the long run, they are the ones who are going to help us when we are in facing actually an extreme situation, because you won't have time for learning during that time. So all those learning and those capacities we need to develop right now, and that depends even on knowing like local say offices in your area where you can go for help and things like that. Secondly, in the behavior aspect about eco anxiety, if you encounter someone and if you can help them in your own way, that would be good. And for our own use, or rather, the way of addressing eco anxiety is similar to way we address our own difficulties, which is trying to have a positive mindset, finding the actionable solutions, and so on. Second aspect is that apart from behavioral changes, um, thinking is also going to, the way we think is going to be very important. Many times there has been this continuous process or hammering that climate has to be considered as a separate entity and every other life goes on as it is. But that wall has broken long ago. We now need to consider environment and climate implications in our actions and in our daily decision making. So, something like pragmatism, where we decide how much is actually necessary, how much can we maintain, and things like that are not going to help us just with the climate crisis. They are also going to contribute to at least slightly reducing the climate crisis we are facing. And second thing which we find during awarenesses, I think Yuval Noah Harari puts it well, information is not truth. So you will have to actually invest in checking what is actually green, what is actually sustainable, what is just greenwashing and not actually uh, helping the environment or even rather harming it. So we have a lot of information even on green now, but unfortunately we will have to educate ourselves into at least receiving that information or finding the right resources so that we don't get astray. And one part in thinking and behavior which you can immediately work on is conscious consumerism. We are living in an economic system where we are consumers and the whole system is designed that way. But the least we can do is that we ensure that the consumerism is at least where it does not contribute to the evils of the system, which is over exploitation or resource consumption or over extraction of resources, pollution, and human violation of human rights and things like that. So that is actually a very easy thing to understand, but integrating it our decision making and not just being aware of it. So when you find something which is happening wrong, if you can find alternatives or support initiatives which are considering all this, then I think it will be it will create a positive pressure on good economic practices and discourage the negative ones. And the second benefit of that is that you get a time of slowness or to think, which will help you to like address even other situations or work life situations you face. And lastly, I would request that if possible, try instead of being thinking sustainability as only a lifestyle thing, if you can incorporate it in your own professions in terms of design or processes, then I think we will have a better understanding of and better answers to when someone says this is the system and there is no alternative. So finding those alternatives and showing that they work is also going to be very important. And I think I'm more or less done. I'll just like to conclude that there is going to be a next panel discussion on sustainable development. We have listened to the problems before. So we have answers in the nature and the communities, like Girija said, and also the innovation or the technology part, but we are not tapping them to their full potential. And at least if we accept that, that's the point we can start with. And resilience is now not a luxury, it is going to be a means of survival. The second aspect is that sometimes resilience is also to push responsibility on the people. It will not work that way. Climate action has to happen, but resilience should be an aspect which is considered within climate action. And personally, as an evolutionary biology student, I think there is a very twisted notion in our society that being strong or dominant is going to ensure your survival. But dinosaurs are not here now. So we will have to learn to adapt. So learn, act, and adapt. I think that's the three things we need to do for sustainability and live them. Thank you.
I mean, thank you. I just want to remember and remind that there was a time when Diwali patakas were very rampant, and that they are polluting, that they are harmful, was inculcated by parents, by society, into the children, by teachers in their school, and it happened. So something like that, out of the box, have to happen in terms of what is must have and what can be classified that may, well, not really. So discretion between must have and may have, that kind of a things should come within the young children. There are some NGOs already working in Pune. They are recirculating the toys and dolls among children, so that everybody doesn't have to buy new things. So there's many small ways things are already happening. What we need to do is to incentivize and scale up. I hope that will happen. So next panelist is Anaga. She's a she's an architect, and in the building and infrastructure, what we do today lasts there for next 50, 60 years. So therefore, it's very challenging for reducing the imprint or the footprint of the infrastructure. Anaga?
Thank you, sir. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you, PIC, all the trustees in front of me, Professor Malik, and my co-panelists. I think Dr. Ajit Ranade laid down a very good context for what I'm going to place in front of you today, and I'm going to borrow possibly a minute from Girija and sort of show some numbers, and those numbers are, of course, alarming numbers. But the point is that in this era of climate change, how are we going to tackle that? Because those numbers are not going away. Those numbers are probably the reality. Yes, there are some predictions, and like Dr. Ranade mentioned, that sometimes predictions also tend to go wrong a little bit. Sometimes we are over-predicting something. It may not really pan out to be true. But from what we have seen of India in the last 60, 70 odd years, these numbers are what our future is going to be. Next, please. So this is the urbanization, and as rightly mentioned by Dr. Ranade, it is relentless, it is unstoppable, it is not pausing even for a second. Right from 1947, if we consider our independence as the starting point, we have not seen any less urbanization that has happened till today. So urbanization is here to stay. All across the world, cities have taken countries out of poverty. Cities have propelled economic growth, and cities have become engines where poor nations have become wealthier nations. And with our 2047 goal of being a developed country after 100 years of our independence, I think cities are going to play a very, very crucial role, and this is what cities are today. In 2047, more than 50% of our population is expected to be in cities, which is around 900 million people. Today, we are at 377 million people, and see the negative externalities of urbanization, which also Dr. Ajit Ranade expressed very clearly. So what we are going to do with our cities is going to chart out our future plan for climate, for ecology, and for our future generation. Next. Again, a quick glance. I just one small sentence behind that. India is often known as an reluctant urbanizer. And despite those numbers, we are not really reluctant in terms of becoming urbanized, but in our mindsets, we are often very reluctant urbanizers. We still romanticize the village. We still romanticize going back to our roots. And I think that is a very unique kind of a citizenry that we have in our cities in India. Again, urbanization level, I'll skip through this for a want of time. One fact about urbanization, which, we always talk about cities in a negative light. We always say cities are polluted, cities are creating congestion, cities are noisy, air pollution. But what we fail to realize is, see these numbers, just go back one. 70% of the population today in India is employed in agriculture and allied, which contributes to about 30 to 35% of GDP. 60% of land is under agriculture. 30% of population is today in cities, employed in cities away from agriculture, and it is contributing to 65 to 70% of the GDP. And it covers only 3% of India's land resource. So cities are actually extremely efficient models of generating economy. We cannot forget that. See, all of us are experiencing the negative externalities of the cities, and yet all of us are here. Nobody is moving out of Pune, right? So what I'm trying to say is that cities also give us a lot of benefits, a lot of positive factors which we enjoy in our cities, and we have to accept that fact and move towards planning. The urbanization pull, I think the push and pull is evident in the way we have looked at cities. You will see here that just a quick outlay of investments by the central ministry. 1.8 lakh crores for rural and 1.3 lakh crores for urban. Yes, right now we are not even 50% urban, but we are contributing 65 to 70% to the GDP, yet the outlay for the urban is less than the rural. So our investment is less. Just go back one again. We are approximately estimated an outlay of 4.6 lakhs crores annually. It is only 1.3 lakh crores. So we are a deficit of about 4 times, or rather, 25% is only getting invested in our cities. And whatever we are seeing is evident for all of us in our everyday lives. These are some of the estimates. I don't know. I'm not an economist by profession, so I don't know whether to believe these numbers. But these are huge numbers. That 70 lakh crores by 2036 and 850 lakh crores by 2047 if we want our cities to really become livable and good engines of economic growth. Next. I will run through this. So right now, basically, despite the need to become decentralized, to take decisions at the local level, we are still run by the state governments because that's where our main funding comes from. Next. Yes, so how do we manage urban investment for planning and building our cities? And when I say investment, please do not take this as investment in physical infrastructure. It means generally investment. It could also be about research. So my first hypothesis is that our first investment, when we start moving towards better cities, moving towards cities which are going to function economic-wise also quite good, we need investment in urban governance. I think without governance, and I think 2-3 speakers since morning have spoken that rules are there, it is not implemented. It's because of governance, lack of governance. So in governance, we need investment. We need investment in urban data and analytics. We do not have data of cities. We do not know where cities are growing. We do not have a cell in Pune Municipal Corporation who is churning only urbanization data, looking at how the development plan is moving, whether it is moving or not, whether it is helping people, or are we just building something that was planned 20 years ago. So all that urban analytics we need to see. We need to create 2 levels of plans, not just partial plans, but economic plans for cities as well. There are economic plans made for states, but they are not made for cities. I think economic plans is very essential for cities if they are supposed to drive us towards being a developed country. And then, of course, investing in future infrastructure is very, very critical. We severely lag behind infrastructure. Projects take time to get approved. They get time to get actually see the light of day. So we need to have a governance system which does this very fast. Next. Yes, this is the second aspect of a city. Many countries and even India has tried investing in cities which are, greenfield cities. So you go outside and say, okay, this is a nice plot of land and I will build a city there. Cities rarely get built like this because of its soft infrastructure. We need education facilities. We need diverse economic sectors for a city to become attractive. It needs to be livable to attract the right kind of talent of people, and that's where Pune wins. It's not a capital of Maharashtra, yet it wins when it comes to this aspect of being livable and cultural and recreational opportunities. Next. Yeah, so spatial plans. I'm just going to highlight the 2 aspects. The dilemma that an urban planner or an urban policymaker faces today is whether we keep the city's footprint limited and grow up, or do we keep the city's low rise and increase the footprint. So vertical versus horizontal development spatially is today the what आपण म्हणतो ना कळीचा मुद्दा आहे तो सध्या की आपण नक्की कुठल्या साईडला जायचं का काही हायब्रिड थर्ड मॉडेल आहे वेअर वी हॅव अ व्हेरी डेन्स कोर सेंटर अँड देन यू हॅव सॉर्ट ऑफ spokes going out to slightly low rise development. टू अ लार्ज एक्सटेंट हे आत्ता आपण जे पुण्याच्या आजूबाजूला टाउनशिप डेव्हलपमेंट बघतो ती सॉर्ट ऑफ ह्या पद्धतीची आहे बट वी हॅव बिकॉज ऑफ द UDCPR अगेन दॅट व्हर्टिकॅलिटी ॲस्पेक्ट इज emphasized in spatial plans. Next. This is how vertical cities look and that's how horizontal cities look. So each has its own environmental problems. Next. And while all of this urbanization was happening, while the Western countries went ahead with their models of urbanization, their planning of infrastructure in an age where climate change was not so significant. Now we have this added challenge of climate change, heat waves, loss of biodiversity, water scarcity and frequency of natural disasters. So now this is already एक खूप कॉम्प्लेक्स गोष्ट चालू, डाळ शिजत होती त्याच्यामध्ये अजून काही मीठ पडलेलं आहे, and how are we going to deal with that? Next. Yes, so like I said, urban governance needs to step up, agile and responsive, enhanced capacity for urban planning. We do not have a cell of urban planning, even in a big and a relatively better urban municipal corporation like Pune. Legal frameworks are seriously lacking. We do not have ways and means to resolve legalities in urban planning. Efficient project management, which I mentioned, and timely infrastructure. Next. Sustainable urbanism, I think I'll skip these parts. Most of the aspects that I was going to talk about was innovation, like Professor Malik and then Professor Mashelkar also mentioned that this conference is about finding solutions. So there are some snippets that I've tried to put here, that while all of this happening, we cannot stay back. Urbanization is anyways happening outside the doors of this conference, even while we are speaking about it. So how do we do it in our everyday manner? What do I do as an architect? What do you do as an economist? What does somebody do as a social entrepreneur? So these are some of the things that we can look at, that decarbonization can become the mantra for all policies, which is not happening right now. There are, of course, crossroads, but we can always see whether the intent of decarbonization is being met or not. Sometimes we may have to take a step back and compensate it in some other ways and means possible. But are we overall moving towards decarbonization? And for that, I come back to the point of being very, very, know our data. We have to know where we are going. So energy use, and we need energy efficiency, shift to renewables, EVs. We need to incentivize public transport. I keep saying that public transport investments need to be looked at with the same eye as we do defense investments. It's for the security of our country. And we don't think about how much money is being spent for that. But we think about how much money is spent in public transport systems, but it is equally important to have that mobility in cities which is efficient. Waste efficiency, waste to energy products, promote green city and green building principles on everyday thing, offset emissions through sequestration, and here in the last slide I had mentioned, plant anywhere and everywhere you can find. Get rooftops to be made vegetative. Vertical areas can be made vegetative. Everywhere we have to include the green leaf, so to speak. Local level incentivization for biodiversity. What is right now happening is we are indirectly, in our quest for development, disincentivizing biodiversity conservation, or for example, if I have an open plot of land and I plant some trees on it, I do not plant in the thing that if next year I want to build a building, I will not get permission to cut. So, we are indirectly disincentivizing anybody from planting trees. So this is what if we can, like you were saying, that if there could be some economic benefits for somebody to plant trees, that would help us move over. And then low carbon materials, this is now coming in a big way. India needs to do its Jugaad innovation to get low carbon materials in place. We can see some massive shifts when our buildings, all our roads, all our infrastructure that we want to move towards 2047 will be low carbon. It will see a massive shift. Next, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anu. This was a vast subject. I don't think we could do justice at the time available. So I request Anaga to supply us the slides and with her notes so that we can. No, I'm serious, because whatever we are doing, we want this to be a part of a sizable, meaningful report, and that we will submit to the government, to Niti Aayog and so on and so forth. So,
I'm Anita Beninger.
yes, Anita.
I know we are very old friends. I have a question for Anaga's urbanization definition. I think most of Indian cities, if you see, 50% of our population lives in Jhopadpattis. So what is your take on that? Do you think they are urbanized?
Yes, because the definition of urbanization as it stands today is that they are not engaged in agricultural activities. So if they are within the jurisdiction of a city, then I would say that they are urbanized.
Okay. One
Reluctantly,
question
if
about
not-
definition of cities. I think we need to take a
Yes,
relook and it
probably.
has to be changed. No, but all these people are engaged in, they are called so-called tertiary activities. But do you think scavengers, garbage pickers, sweepers, etc., are actually engaged in tertiary activities? Because primary, secondary, tertiary, I think Girija is here.
What
So
would you call them?
I would call them primary.
Okay.
How will they be tertiary? Because there is no intellect applied. What is it? There is no manufacturing, there is no processing, nothing. I think agriculture is more difficult. It just multiplies, but there is plowing, there is planting, lot of technology is used in that. If you are picking rack picker, if you are a rack picker, how do you become a part of the tertiary activity? They are called tertiary activities and said that they are living in cities, so they are urban. Because urbanization is actually a subset of civilization. And it is supposed to take you forward. It is supposed to give you urbanity, which is a different set of values.
I think it's a complex subject. I don't
It
think
is.
you can do
So
justice.
I think we need to not trivialize urbanization.
No,
like
of course
this.
not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Of course not.
It's extremely serious.
Yeah. For want of time,
Yeah.
can you talk to us later on?
Maybe one question, because this is related on the suggestion she has given about decarbonization of the society and the cities. And this exactly refers to the 2 points, what Dr. Masherkar said, that we have cutting trees and then scrambling for solutions. This is not the crisis of nature, but it's a crisis of leadership.
What is your question?
The question is, in the decarbonization, what suggestions are we given is why don't we look at our local issues right now? This is an emergency conference. This is a climate emergency.
Yeah.
So we have to first, the charity starts at home. So what about those projects which are happening here in Pune? Especially the River Development Fund project, the destruction of the urban
not
forest
by
here in
people.
Pune.
It's
So,
not by people. We are talking about people.
and we are talking about the projects which is affecting the climate emergency
Yes.
locally.
Correct.
So my question as to the urban planner as such is, how does she look at these particular projects? Thank you.
Yeah, so my suggestion would be to look at the project with the lens of a climate change and whether we are addressing, whether we are moving forward. Like I mentioned, in urbanization, there could be sometimes steps back that have to be taken, but are we really compensating those steps that we are taking backwards? Are we moving in the right direction? Because India is poised at a very critical role where we will still need to build, where our carbon emissions are still going to grow, but whether for per unit of rupee earned, whether that carbon is efficiently utilized or not, is really the question here. So yes, each project should go through that, like a fire test of whether you are meeting your climate change requirements or not.
Thank you. I'm happy that the discussion is warming up, but a bit too late in the day because we have limited time. So may I request President to please take the next one. Please connect with us later on.
Fine. So, just to point out that we are in a climate emergency because these were the predictions of IPCC and we are not really getting there. The impacts are increasing across the world and we were supposed to start reducing our fossil fuel consumption from 2030 onwards. That's highly unlikely with the way the US politics has evolved in the last few months. And we need to also start removing carbon dioxide, but there also we still don't have very powerful tools in our hand. Just keep greening and some small technologies like biochar, those are the only options available. Next slide. Next slide. These couple of decades are going to be really, really crucial, 2020 to 2040.
History will look back and say that these were the decades of climate action or inaction. We are, in a way, writing the history of the future. And this is next. This is happening in times when the entire politics across the world, you see, take it, I mean, USA is a very glaring example, but even in India, politics is financed by petroleum companies. This is a huge conflict of interest when it comes to climate action by the political establishment. And that, in a way, is responsible for creating this emergency. So how are we going to solve this? However, I want to just point out a few things here in the Indian context. You can just, if you look at the cumulative emissions, because the impacts that we are facing today are because of the additional greenhouse gases that have gone into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. So if you look at this entire cumulative emissions, our contribution is minuscule. We are not responsible for the problems that we are facing today. We will be responsible for the problems in the future, but even then, even in 2050, our share will be just about 10%, which basically means that we have to have realistic understanding that even if we go carbon neutral, that will just be a minute dent in solving this global problem. I'm not saying that we should not go towards reducing our emissions, but we have to have that realism that we are not in a position to really solve this problem. If we look at the carbon neutrality pledges, and this is an interesting thing to think about, we are one of the top 4 emitters. We are also going to be the last, one of the last bunch of countries to go carbon neutral. And right now that 2050 target is highly shaky because of US, which is definitely not going to become carbon neutral by 2050. Because in the next 4 years, everything is going to go wrong there. So that's the thing, that if the 2050 target is not being met, then it doesn't matter whether China and India go carbon neutral or not. The problem will have already escalated to very high level. If that target is met, then all the eyes will be on us. However, the entire climate discourse is written by developed countries. If you look at the way reports are given about the COP discussions over the last few years, India and China are always painted as these people who are blocking action, etc., etc. So history will write us as villains no matter what we do. That also is something that we have to keep in mind. Next slide. Our problem is actually unique because not only do we need to reduce our emissions, even if only to keep us relevant in the global discussions, if nothing else, but our bigger problem is that we are also one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change, and we don't talk about this enough. We have to do more to actually help our own citizens to deal with climate change. And this becomes a bigger, complicated problem because the groups in the population which are contributing to emissions and which are getting impacted by emissions are 2 entirely different population groups. And those who are contributing to emissions are benefiting from it. That makes it even more difficult to create effective mechanisms to help reduce vulnerabilities. So we have to understand all these tensions and dynamics that are there within the Indian society itself when we talk about our climate action. Next slide. Just keep pressing. There are layers of climate injustice in India. In the international negotiations, especially last year, this was very striking. I was there in Azerbaijan. It was a very unusual COP. But India is now turning out to be a sort of a lone crusader for all developing countries talking about climate justice issues. But within India, there is climate injustice. We have to first address that in order to give ourselves that moral authority to talk about it internationally. Environmental legislations are being weakened left and right. No cognizance of climate change in environment impact assessments. And that is the reason why we see these projects that you are talking about, riverfront development, breakthrough takeries to create roads. All of this is happening because our laws are outdated. Our laws are not even looking at what climate change is going to do to our cities. How are we going to address that fundamental issue while we also keep fighting these local fires. States are coming up with adaptation plans. This is not the first time states came up with climate action plans. Way back in 2010s, also there were state level adaptation plans. Where are those glossily printed documents now? Even the secretariats will not be able to find them, I'm sure. Because adaptation or any climate action requires multiple government departments to work together. Our governments are just not used to that kind of mode of operation. That is another barrier in climate action. Next slide. So that's the thing, that we have to work on these four things: reduce emissions, sequester carbon, build responsive resilience, and disaster preparedness. But no systemic planning seems to be happening. There are a number of actions which can happen, which can achieve both. So while achieving adaptation, we can also keep on reducing our emissions. But if you look at the way budgets are allocated, we are still allocating a lot of funding, for example, for large-scale renewable energy, not enough to decentralize renewable energy, which will give us both mitigation and adaptation. So these are the issues that need to be corrected. Next slide. And that's the last one, I think. And this is really the big question. Can thought leaders, and I am assuming that all of us at least think or aspire to be thought leaders, can we raise climate literacy to the level that people will force politics to be unshackled from petroleum? Because politicians are moved only by two things. One is money, other is votes. Money is not in our hands, votes is in our hands. However, it was really concerning for me today to see the extent of climate misinformation that has spread when an eminent economist talks about people's breathing contributing to climate change. I'm sorry, that's a very, very wrong and unethical statement to make. Because that's the kind of an argument which has been forwarded, which points fingers to the poorest parts of the world, which is where population is still increasing. But those people are not contributing to climate change. Climate change is happening because of those parts of the world where populations are decreasing, but they don't want to take that responsibility, and that is why population numbers are considered as one of the cause of climate change. But no biological system is ever contributing to climate change. It is the additional greenhouse gases that go into the climate that is responsible for climate change, and that comes from burning petroleum fuels. If that much understanding is not there among thought leaders, then how are we going to raise the literacy? That's a big concern that has come for me today in this conference. And can we do this fast enough to avoid civilizational collapse, which people are predicting will happen in the middle of this century? So this is really the questions that we have to ask ourselves and address emergency in that context by looking at the global connectivity of these issues and figuring out what we need to do locally. I think raising science-based climate literacy has to be a priority on the scale that raising literacy was made a priority in this country at one point in time. Even if we focused on that, a lot of issues will resolve themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Priya. Wow. We tried to tackle a problem, an animal, which cannot be managed. But that too in less than 1 hour. But all said and done, many issues have come up, many thoughts have come up. Priyadarshini is a thought leader in climate justice. So obviously she's going to feel very strongly about, in the process of climate change, once again we should not make the same mistake. So everywhere we will find that we are going through a complete societal churning, complete humankind churning. My generation has escaped, but the young generation will have to deal with it, and deal with it in a constructive way, in a positive way, so that we end up in 50 years so? Why 50 years? We are not really talking about 2050, 25 years. What we do in the next 25 years will decide what we will do in the next 25 decades. The role of society, role of the people, role of homes, families cannot be understated. That is what we wanted to bring it together in this session. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. This deserved much more detailed discussion. One question cannot do any justice to anybody. I've heard of your talk, I've heard of your work. Can you please come and spend some time with us? Help us prepare a policy paper. This is the job that we do in PIC. We propose policy advisory paper, we propose to government, and we try to push it. So that we are. Thank you very much. I think for the want of time, we have to close here. Let me first sincerely thank my panelists. Wonderful thoughts shared in such a short time. And once again, I'll say that please share your thoughts and let's put together a concrete plan on how society can respond to the inevitable climate emergency that is happening. Thank you.